Now reaching the end of the second chapter of the Gulag Archipelago, titled A History of Our Sewage Disposal System. And Solzhenitsyn does a little bit of a roundup here. He says, first of all, this chapter does not attempt by any means to list all the waves which fertilized the Gulag, but only those which had a political coloration. So notice he's been talking about various ethnic nationalities, political dissidents, people who said something critical of the regime, intellectuals, even some of them from the Communist Party. But he says that there were also waves of non-political offenders. In other words, they're getting you, but for some other reason. It could be that they consider you a habitual criminal. It could be for some other reason. And so right in the middle of this, and this is now after the war, Stalin issues a new decree. And he says, according to this new decree, the old prison sentence, which was called the tenor, the tenor colloquially meaning 10 years, you get a tenor, 10-year sentence, is suddenly seen now to be not enough. You need to get more than 10 years. And there's a new crackdown after the war on people who are supposedly, think of this absurdity of this, accused of robbing their own grain. So I've mentioned this before, but the idea here is that you are part of a so-called collective farm. You work and you produce grain, but if you're starving and in the middle of the night, if you go and eat some of that grain, instead of turning it all over to the Soviet collective to then be dispersed how they see fit, if you do that, you are stealing grain. It reminds me a little bit of the days of slavery, where Frederick Douglass, the runaway slave, but this was when he was a slave, was accused of robbing from his master, and robbing from his master by eating his master's pork. And Frederick Douglass goes, well, I can't rob from my master because I'm not considered a human being. I'm myself a thing. So just like you cannot accuse one possession of the master of somehow absorbing another possession of the master. For example, the pig is now eating the master's grain. Well, that's not robbery because the pig also belongs to the master. So this is Frederick Douglass talking about this. But here in the Soviet Union, Stalin is punishing people for, quote, stealing their own grain. There's also another recrimination after the war against dissidents. At this point, writes Solzhenitsyn, the autocrat decided it wasn't enough to arrest just those who had survived since 1937. What about the children of his sworn enemies? They too must be imprisoned. They were growing up, and they may have notions of vengeance. Now, the new prison sentences under Stalin go up from 10 years to now 25 years. And writes Solzhenitsyn, by now the tenor was for juveniles. So if you're underage and they imprison you, well, they're going to show some mercy. I put the word in quote marks and give you 10 years. But if you are an adult, it's now normally going to be 25 years. And you notice that when you have these fully formed police states, they become very regimented. They don't want to make fine discriminations. Oh, you get 13 years, you get 17. No, they keep it really simple. You're under the age of 18, okay, 10 years. You're over the age of 18, 25 years. Part of the shock value of Solzhenitsyn's writings, and you see this not just in the Gulag, but also in his earlier work, One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, is that the casualness with which these officials hand out lengthy prison sentences for sometimes very trivial offenses. And think about it. You're accused of, stealing some bacon from the kitchen or even picking up bacon that's fallen to the ground and eating it. 5 years. 5 years for that one action that probably took you 3 seconds to do. Stalin's new line suggesting that it was necessary in the wake of the victory over fascism to jail more people more energetically and for longer terms than ever before. Think of the inverted logic of that. Normally you'd say, well, we won the war, The Soviet Union now comes out ahead. We need to rebuild our society. We need all hands on deck. It's not of any value to us to just lock people up in prison for long terms. But no, Stalin takes the opposite message. Now that we've won, we're not accountable to anybody. In fact, we can now import back some of the Russians who are living in other societies, and we'll get a good bit of jail material from those guys. Also, let's sort of ramp up the prison arrests. And so things, far from getting better, actually get worse. And then Solzhenitsyn, who again has this kind of very nice literary style, he doesn't believe in just ending a chapter by just stopping. He ends the chapter usually with some pungent and ironic observation that you're going to remember. And so he goes on to say, the preceding exposition would have made clear that in the removal of millions and the populating of the Gulag, consistent, cold-blooded planning and never weakening persistence were at work. We never had, he says, empty prisons or merely prisons which were full or prisons which were, he said, we merely had prisons which were full or prisons which were very, very overcrowded. And this, he says, proves that the organs, he means the organs of the Soviet state, always earned their pay. Last month, the G20 group announced it welcomed discussion of the effects of implementing central bank digital currencies in their countries. Now, these digital currencies could allow the government to track every purchase you make. They could even allow officials to prohibit you from purchasing certain products or freeze or seize part or all of your money. In essence, the government gets control over your finances. Now, concerned Americans like me are diversifying our assets into physical gold with the help of Birch Gold Group. If you want a physical asset held in a tax-sheltered retirement account, you should call Birch Gold. Debbie and I are customers. We buy our gold through Birch Gold. But find out for yourself. Text Dinesh to 989898. You'll get a free information kit on gold. And here's the easiest way to become a Birch Gold customer. If you got an IRA or a 401k from a previous employer, Birch Gold can help you convert it into an IRA in gold, and you don't pay a penny out of pocket. Text Dinesh to 989898. Claim your free information kit on gold and call them, because if digital currency becomes a reality, it'll be nice to have some gold to fall back on.